Shalom, shalom. Hey, I'm back. I want to do another video in reference to the Last Supper. Many teach that the Last Supper, in fact, was the actual day that Yahushua HaMashiach was crucified on the Passover. And I just want to go in the scripture and give some edification, some understanding on that, and show that the Last Supper, in fact, was the day prior to the crucifixion or the Passover, which took place on the 14th. So the Last Supper, according to the scriptures, happened on the 13th day of the month of Abib. So I just want to go in the scripture and give some edification on that. And as always, my foundational scripture is 1 Thessalonians 5:21, and it says, prove all things, hold fast that which is good. So I'm going to go in the scripture and give some edification on this particular topic, and just show, like I said in scripture, that the actual day that Yahushua was crucified was the day after the Last Supper took place, according to the scripture. I'm going to pick it up at Matthew chapter 20. Matthew chapter 20, and I'm going to start at verse 17. So it says, and Yahushua going up to Jerusalem took the 12 disciples apart in the way and said unto them, behold, we go up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man shall be betrayed unto the chief priests and to the scribes, and they shall condemn him to death. So this is talking about, this is right in line with Deuteronomy 16:16, that says, 3 times in a year shall all males appear before the Most High, and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles. So he says again, behold, we go up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man shall be betrayed unto the chief priests and to the scribes, and they shall condemn him to death. So this is talking about the crucifixion, the Passover. So the key word here is talking about, it says that he shall be betrayed. So this word betrayed is going to prove later on that the Last Supper is in fact actually the 13th day and not the 14th day. So it says, verse 19, and shall deliver him to the Gentiles, and to scourge and to crucify him, and the third day he shall rise again. So I know it's commonly taught that the Gentiles are the northern kingdom, but that's absolutely false doctrine. I'm going to go into and get a precept, Matthew 16 and verse 21. And it says, from that time forth began Yahushua to shew unto his disciples how that he must go up to Jerusalem and suffer many things of the elders and the chief priests and the scribes. So the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, these are Israelites that condemned Hamashiach and turned him over to the Gentiles, meaning Pontius Pilate and the Roman centurions. So it says, and to be killed and raised again the third day. So we have to understand, according to the scripture, that Yahushua was crucified and buried on the 14th day. We have to understand that he was crucified and buried on the 14th day. He rested in the sepulchre on the 15th, being the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is the Sabbath. And he rose the third day, which is the Feast of, which is first fruits. So this is what it is saying. It says that he would raise again the third day. So, I just wanted to show that, but let me go back to the scriptures. So I'm going to pick it up at Matthew 26 and verse 1. And it says, and it came to pass when Yahushua had finished all these sayings, he said unto his disciples, ye know that after 2 days is the feast of the Passover, and the Son of Man is to be betrayed and crucified. So once again, we're talking about him being betrayed and crucified. So it says, ye know that after 2 days is the feast of Passover, and the Son of Man is to be betrayed and crucified. So what we have to understand is that the Passover, again, is the 14th day. So when he says that after 2 days is the feast of Passover, and the Son of Man is to be crucified, he's making this statement on the 12th day. 2 days after that would be the Feast of Unleavened, the Feast of the Passover. So he's making this claim on the 12th day which is 2 days before the feast of before the Passover, is what he's saying, right? So let me go back to the scripture. So again, he says, "You know that after 2 days is the feast of the Passover, and the Son of Man is to be betrayed and crucified." So I'm gonna pick up the Last Supper, John 13 and verse 1. So it says, "Now before the feast of the Passover, when Yahusha knew that his hour was come, that he should depart out of this world unto the Father, having loved his own which were in the world, he loved them to the end." So this says clearly now before the feast of the Passover, right? So I want to get a definition on the word before. So the word before refers to an earlier time or previously or in front of something in the time or order of space. So when he says, now before the feast of the Passover, he's talking about the day prior to that or a time prior to the actual event that's taking place. So we read again, now before the feast of the Passover, when Yahusha knew that his hour was come, that he should depart out of this world unto the Father, having loved his own which were in the world, he loved them to the end. Verse 2. And supper being ended, the devil having put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. So clearly right here, this is talking about a time prior to the actual Passover, and is referring to the supper that he had with his disciples. And it says right here that when verse 2 again, and supper being ended, the devil having now put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. So he would be the one to betray Yahushua Hamashiach. Verse 3, Yahushua, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he was come from Yahuwah and went to Yahuwah. Verse 4, he rises up from supper and laid aside his garments and took a towel and girded himself. So this is clearly the Last Supper. And again, verse 1 says, and before the feast of the Passover. So this is before the feast of the Passover, a time prior. Verse 2 again says, and supper being ended, the devil having now put into the heart of Judas Iscariot to betray him. So this is what this is talking about. I'm drop down to verse 18. So this is Hamashiach washing the feet of the disciples, and he's telling them that one of them would be the one to betray him. So verse 18 says, I speak not of you all. I know whom I have chosen, but that the scripture may be fulfilled. He that eateth bread with me have lifted up his heel against me. So he says right here, I'm not talking about all of y'all. I'm talking about one specific individual. And like it said, the devil entered into Judas Iscariot. So he's telling them about him. And he said that this one that's going to be the one to betray him is fulfilling scripture. So a rule of thumb, whenever we always see, as it is written or something shall be fulfilled, we have to go back and see exactly what that is. So again, it says, I speak not of you all. I know whom I have chosen, but that the scripture may be fulfilled. He that eateth bread with me have lifted up his heel against me. So I'm going to get the precept for this real quick. Psalms 41 and verse 9. So it says, yea, mine own familiar friend in whom I've trusted, which did eat of my bread, have lifted up his heel against me. So right here, so this is what Judas Iscariot fulfilled again when it says in verse 18, I speak not of you all, I know whom I have chosen, but that the scripture may be fulfilled. He that eateth bread with me have lifted up his heel against me. Because you remember in Luke 21:44, Hamashiach says he came to fulfill that which was written of him in the law of Moses and in the prophet and the Psalms. So this is what was fulfilled when Judas Iscariot came against Hamashiach. So I'm going to drop down and pick it up at verse 21. It says, when Yahushua had thus said, he was troubled in his spirit and testified and said, verily, verily, or truly, truly, I say unto you that one of you shall betray me. So he's telling the disciples that one of them is going to be the one to betray him, right? So this is what he's telling them. So it says, verse 22, then the disciples looked one on another, doubting of whom he spake. Now there was leaning on Yahushua's bosom one of his disciples, whom Yahushua loved. Simon Peter, therefore, beckoning to him that he should ask who it should be of whom he spake. Verse 25, he then lying on Yahushua's breast, say unto him, Master, who is it? Verse 26, Yahushua answered, he it is to whom I shall give sop, and when I have sopped it, and when he had dipped the sop, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon. So again, he said that the devil, verse 2, he said, and after supper being ended, the devil having now put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. So this is what this is talking about, right? So back to verse 25. Verse 26, Yahushua answered, he it is to whom I shall give sop when I have dipped. And when he had dipped the sop, he gave it to Judas Iscariot. Verse 27, the son of Simon. Verse 27, and after the sop, Satan entered into him. Then said Yahushua unto him, thou doest, do quickly. So Hamashiach knew that his time was at hand, and he told him to do it quickly, right? So let me get a precept for that. Romans 6 and 16. It says, know ye not to whom ye yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants ye are, to whom ye obey, whether of sin unto death or of obedience unto righteousness. So Judas Iscariot lent himself to the devil to do the will of the devil. So this is what this is talking about. And, side note, when it says the serpent seed, it's not talking about the devil had intercourse with anybody's mother. But if you lend yourself over to the things of the devil, of his nature, then you are of the serpent seed, is what this is talking about, right? John 13, pick it back up. Verse 27, we were at. So again, he says, and after the sop, Satan entered into him. Then Yahushua said unto him, that what thou doest, do quickly, right? So another point I want to make with this, verse 28 and 29, it says, no man at the table knew for what the intent he spake this unto him. So when he said that to Judas Iscariot, they didn't understand why he said it. Verse 29 says, for some of them thought because Judas had the bag, that Yahushua had said unto him, buy those things which that we have need of against the feast, or that he should give something to the poor. So another point with this, if this was the actual Passover meal, they would have had everything prior to the meal taking place. Because it says right here, for some of them thought that Judas had the bag. And even with that terminology there, when we say people chasing the bag or they going for the bag, that's so-called Negroes speaking. That's just our terminology. So it says that because Judas had the bag, that Yahushua said unto him, buy those things which we have need of against the feast. Because again, in verse 1, it said, verse 1 again says, now before the feast of the Passover, when Yahushua knew that his hour was come, that he should depart out of this world unto the Father, having loved his own, which were in the world, he loved them unto the end. So again, this is saying that it's prior to the feast taking place. And then that verse there, 29, is saying that they thought that he was telling him to go get things to prepare for the feast. So if this was the actual feast, being the Passover, they would have had things taken care of prior to that happening, right? So I'm gonna pick it up at John 18 to get some more understanding on this here and continue to show that this is not the Passover. So John 18, it says, when Yahusha had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples over the brook Cedron, where was a garden in which he entered and his disciples. So he's going to the garden and with his disciples, right? Verse 2 says, and Judas also, which betrayed him, knew the place, for Yahusha oftentimes resorted thither with his disciples. So Judas was very familiar with where Hamashiach would be because he took his disciples there many times before, is what this is saying. So he knew exactly where Hamashiach would be. Verse 3, Judas then having received a band of men and officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees coming thither with lanterns and torches and weapons. So right here, he's coming to him with lanterns and torches. So this is showing that it's a night that this is happening, right? And we know when we go into scripture that Hamashiach was crucified the third hour of the day, being 9 o'clock in the morning. So this is clearly another point showing that there's no way that this is the actual Passover, because they wouldn't be coming to him with lanterns and torches and weapons, right? This is what this is saying, right? So I want to get a precept for this. Luke 22 and 20, 22 and 20. And it says, precept, 1 Corinthians, Salakia. Matthew 26 is where I want to be. Matthew 26, verse 45. I'm going to start there because he says specifically the lanterns and torches. So I just want to show how the Gospels go hand in hand concerning this, right? So this is Matthew 26 and 45. It says, then cometh he to the disciples and say unto them, sleep on now, and take your rest. Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of the sinners. So this is saying they're at the Garden of Gethsemane, where Judas Iscariot knows where he's at because they've been there many times before. So he's telling the disciples to sleep on. So he came to them 3 times. So the third time he's telling them to sleep on. It says the Son of Man is to be betrayed in the hands of the sinners. Verse 46 says, rise, let us be going. Behold, he is at hand that doth betray me. So he's telling them, let's go, because the person that's going to betray me is on his way, is what he's telling them, right? Verse 47, and while he yet spoke, lo, Judas, one of the 12, came, and with him a great multitude with swords and staves. Like we just read, he came with lanterns and torches and weapons. So the weapons are the swords and the staves from the chief priests and the elders of the people. So this is what this is talking about, right? So he's coming to him. He's coming to him in the garden to betray him because he told him they was at hand, right? So I'm gonna pick it back up. And show how the Gospels connect, right? So we're gonna go to John 13. John 13 again. John 13. I'm gonna pick it up at verse 36. So right here it says, Simon Peter said unto him, Master, whither goest thou? Yahushua answered him, Whether I go, thou canst not follow me now, but thou shalt follow me afterwards. Right? So he's saying where he's going, you can't follow me, right? So Peter said unto him, Master, why can't I follow thee now? I will lay down my life for thy sake. So Peter's saying he's going to lay down his life for his sake. And he said he doesn't understand why he can't go with him now. So he's telling him he's going to prepare a place for him. So verse 38 says, Yahusha answered him, Wilt thou lay down thy life for my sake? Verily, verily, I say unto thee, the cock shall not crow till thou hast denied me thrice. So he's telling Peter, he said, before the cock crows 3 times, you're going to deny me 3 times. Thrice is 3 times, right? So this is what he's telling them, right? So I'm gonna pick it up and show how these gospels connect this story. All of the gospels go hand in hand, and there's no confusion when it comes to the scriptures. John 18, I'm gonna pick it up at verse 16 to get some more as far as the cock crowing. So verse 16 says, But Peter stood at the door without, then went out that other disciple. So Peter was with another disciple, which was known unto the high priest, and spake unto her that keep the door, and brought in Peter. Verse 17, then saith the damsel, thou that kept the door, unto Peter, art thou also one of this man's disciples? He say, I am not. So this is the first time that Peter is denying that he's one of the disciples of Hamashiach. Dropping down to verse 25, it says, and Simon Peter stood and warned him. They said therefore unto him, art thou also the one of his disciples? He denied it and said, I am not. So this is the second time that he's denying it, right? Verse 26, one of the servants of the high priest, being his kinsman, whose ear Peter cut off, saith, did not I see thee with him in the garden? So because when they came to get Hamashiach in the Garden of Gethsemane, he recognized Peter there because Peter was the one that cut his ear off, is what he's saying, right? So this is what he's talking about, right? Verse 28 says, verse 27 says, Peter then denied again. So this is the third time, and it says, and immediately the cock crew. So the cock crew immediately. So Hamashiach told Peter he would deny him 3 times before the cock crew. So the cock crew 3 times, and he denied him, right? This is what this is talking about, right? Let's pick this up in Matthew 27 and verse 1. It says, well, let me go back because I wanna show something with that John 18. I want to show you that when that cock crew, that it was the changing of the day. Verse 28 again. 18 and 28. It says, then led they Yahusha from Caiaphas unto the hall of judgment, and it was early, and they themselves went not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, but they might eat the Passover. So again, we're still talking about the Passover, and this is the same night that Hamashiach washed the disciples' feet. This is the same night that it said before the Passover is taking place. This is the same night that Peter denied him 3 times, right? Because if we go back up here to verse 27, it says Peter then denied again, and immediately the cock crew. Verse 28 says, then they led Yahusha from Caiaphas, and I know I'm probably saying that wrong, unto the hall of judgment, and it was early, and they themselves went not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, that they might not eat the Passover. So they didn't want to go into the judgment hall because in the judgment hall, people were being put to death. And so if they were going to the judgment hall, they would be defiled by reason of a dead body, and they would not be in a position to be able to take the Passover, to partake of the Passover meal. But when it says right here, early, I want to go and show that as well, because I want to show that that word early right there is meaning the changing of the day. So when we read that there, that's the day changing. So this is John 18 and 28, where we were just at. Let me pull it up on my phone, my Bible, so I can read that again. So I want to make the point of this. John 18 and 20, I'm going to read 27. And Peter then denied again, and immediately the cock crew. Verse 28. Then led they Yahusha from Caiaphas unto the hall of judgment, and it was early, and they themselves were not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, but they might eat the Passover. So when the word's early right there, after the cock crew, and it says early, that word early right there is Strong's Concordance 4404, which means early in the morning, at dawn. It says daybreak. So when the cock crew at for the third time, thrice, that was the changing of the day. That's when the day changed right there. So the day, anything prior to that, prior to this happening, was the day prior to the actual Passover. So we see right here, even with this verse, he says that they didn't want to go into the judgment hall, least they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. Because again, if they went into the judgment hall where they were killing people, putting people to death, they would be defiled by reason of a dead body, wouldn't be able to partake of the Passover. So I just wanted to go back and make that point. Well, let me go to Matthew 27 and verse 1 and show that now when it said early over there when the cock crew, now this is the very next day at the rising of the sun, because every biblical day starts at the rising of the sun that takes place in the east, unlike what we've been taught with the false doctrine that evening constitutes the starting point of the day, when the evening part is simply the ending of the day, like Hamashiach said in John 11 and 9, that is there but 12 hours in the day? Absolutely. He's talking about the daylight portion. So the day starts at the rising of the sun, which takes place in the east, and the sun sets in the west. That is the 12 hours of light called day. So when it said early, when the cock crew, this is the very next day, which started at the rising of the sun. So it says right here in Matthew 27, when the morning was come, all the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against Yahusha to put him to death. So you see, this is the very next day, right? And it says, verse 2, it says, and when they had bound him, they led him away and delivered him unto Pontius Pilate, the governor. So when it says that he would be betrayed and be given into the hands of the Gentiles, this is what this is talking about. Pontius Pilate and the Roman centurions are the Gentiles. This is what he's saying, right? So I'm going to go drop down to verse 45 in context. Verse 45 says, now from the 6th hour, there was darkness all over the land until the 9th hour. So this is talking about Hamashiach being crucified. So it says, now from the 6th hour, there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. Verse 46, and about the 9th hour, Yahusha cried with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, that is to say, my Lord, why hast thou forsaken me? So clearly we see he's being crucified the very next day, which would be the 14th. So again, I want to show this again. I want to show this again. Like I said, you have to understand that now we read earlier that Hamashiach says that that it's 2 days and then it's the Passover. And he was referring to the 12th day. The Passover is the 14th day here. So we see here that when we read in John 13:1, it said that it was before the Passover, right? Right here, 13. So that was the 13th day. When the cock crew the third time, that word early in the Strong's Concordance is 4404, which means dawn. So that was the starting point of the 14th, which is the crucifixion. So it's clearly outlining that in scripture and showing that when Hamashiach was crucified, with the Passover started the very next day, opposed to the day that people are teaching that is the Last Supper. So again, we go back to John 13 and verse 1, we see now before the feast of the Passover, when Yahushua knew that his hour was come, that he should depart out of this world unto the Father, having loved his own which were in the world, he loved them until the end. So another thing I want to show too, another thing that happened prior to his crucifixion. First Corinthians, and y'all forgive me, it's kind of a little out of it, but I'm trying to bring this out because this is something that needs to be put out because we've been taught wrong when it comes to that. So I want to pick this up because this is another thing that took place the day prior to the actual Passover. So this is 1 Corinthians 11 and 23, it says, "For I have received of the master that which also I delivered unto you, that the master Yahusha, the same night that he was betrayed, took bread." So when it says the same night, when it's saying the same night, he's talking about the 13th day. He says the same night he was betrayed. Well, he was betrayed by Judas Iscariot when he came to the Garden of Gethsemane with the multitude, with the torches and the lanterns and the weapons. He got him that night. Peter denied him 3 times that night. Peter didn't want to go into the judgment hall because he would be unclean and would, by reason of a dead body, and wouldn't be able to partake of the Passover. So when we read this here, we're reading that this is the same night, right? So it tells us, again, verse 23, "For I have received of the master that which also I delivered unto you, that the master Yahushua, the same night in which he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he brake it and said, Take, eat, this is my body, which was broken for you. This do in remembrance of me." So this is what the church calls the communion. This is what he gave the disciples, the bread and the cup. Verse 25 says, "And after the same manner he took the cup, and when he had supped, saying, This is the cup of the New Testament in my blood. This do ye as often as you drink it in remembrance of me." So what you have to understand too is that this was not the Passover day that this took place, because prior to Hamashiach being crucified, he had to be crucified. He was showing them, foreshadowing them, that his blood would be the testament, the New Testament. But it's not the New Testament until after he dies. Let me get this real quick and I'm gonna close, because I don't even know how long this is, but this is Hebrews chapter 9, and I think it's let me see where it's at. Hebrews 9, Hebrews 9 and 15, because he's telling them this is the testament, the cup is the blood of his New Testament. So right here, what you have to understand is that right here, Hebrews 9 and 15, it says, "And for this cause he is the mediator of the New Testament, that by means of death, for the redemption of the transgressions that were under the first testament, they which are called might receive the promise of the eternal inheritance. So he's telling them right there that um, what he's showing them was a foreshadow of the fact that he was going to be crucified, and that his blood would be the New Testament, bring us into the New Testament. But he had to first be crucified in order for us to come into the New Testament. So when we look into the scriptures again, it's clear that that the Last Supper took place the day prior to the Feast of Passover, which the supper took place on the 13th day. It's clear in Scripture. When we go back into the Scriptures again, like I said, it said the day before. It said the day before the Passover. Well, the day before the Passover is the 13th day. Again, in closing with this, Peter betrayed him. Judas Iscariot betrayed him. He brought the people to the Garden of Gethsemane by night with the torches and the lanterns. When Hamashiach says to Judas, do it quickly, the other disciples thought that he meant he was telling them to go prepare for the feast. So again, if that was the feast, if that was the Passover, they would have already prepared prior to that. So then we go on, we see Peter denying Hamashiach thrice or three times. The third time he did so, the cock crew, and that word early there, we went into the Strong's Concordance, it was 4404, and it shows that that word meant dawn, at the rising of the sun. We went into Matthew, and Matthew's showing us that Hamashiach was crucified the third hour of the day, being 9 o'clock. He gave up the ghost on the ninth hour, which is 3 p.m. in the afternoon. So it's clear that that Last Supper was not the Passover meal. That Last Supper was in place to bring forth the crucifixion of Hamashiach, to bring forth to where his blood would be the New Testament. And we also see that the same night, it said the same night that he was betrayed, that he gave him the bread and the cup. So all of these events took place prior to the Passover. So it's commonly taught, like I said, that the Passover, that the Last Supper is the Passover meal, and the scriptures just don't substantiate that. The scriptures clearly tells us that that took place the day prior to the Passover. So I just wanted to go in the scripture and give some understanding on that. I kind of was a little off on stuff as far as how I'm feeling about things, but nevertheless, the precepts speak for themselves, and it's clear that the Last Supper was not the Passover meal. So with that, I say, Shalom.